Elias Carr rode with the pain. It was an old companion, settled deep in his left hip where the bone had knitted back wrong. A dull, grinding reminder of a saber cut he'd taken a lifetime ago. It made the long ride down from the high canyon an agony of slow jarring. But the cabin was low on flour and salt, and the heavy, bruised look of the sky to the north promised an early winter. He needed supplies, and that meant facing Dry Creek. The town was not a place for comfort. It was a scar on the land, a muddy, rutted street of raw timber buildings that had sprung up to bleed the miners and fleece the trappers. The air smelled of wet pine, pulverized rock, and the sharp tang of the tannery that operated upstream, its effluent turning the creek a sickly brown. He hitched his mare, Bess, outside the mercantile, her breath pluming in the sharp afternoon air. She was a steady, quiet horse, and he valued her company more than that of most men. He gave her a pat on the neck, his hands stiff, the cold already seeping into his joints. He was 34 years old, but some mornings, the war and the weather made him feel he had passed 70. Elias moved with a deliberate slowness that most men mistook for laziness. It was, in fact, carefulness. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders from a life of hard labor, but he carried himself as if trying to take up less space, to draw less notice. His face was weathered and bearded, with eyes the color of a winter sky, eyes that had seen too much and said too little. The war had taken the ease from him. 10 years gone, and the memories still held him fast, like a wolf trap on the soul. He had been a Union scout, a man good at moving unseen, good at finding paths others missed, good at the quiet, dirty work of survival. They were skills he now used only to keep the world at a safe distance from his small, isolated patch of land. He finished his business at the mercantile. Flour, beans, a 50-pound sack of salt for curing, a new axe handle, and 2 boxes of cartridges. He paid in coin, his words clipped, avoiding the proprietor's attempts at idle chatter. To the town, he was just Elias Carr, the quiet rancher from the high hills. No one knew about the scout. No one knew about the fire, or the guilt that rode him harder than any horse. A phantom presence at his back. He had one last stop, a bottle of whiskey. Not to get drunk, though he had known those nights, but to cut the cold and dull the throb in his hip on the long ride home. The mercantile only sold watered-down temperance mixers, useless against the kind of cold he carried. He hated the saloons. He hated the noise, the smell of stale sweat and spilled beer, and the brittle, desperate hope of the men inside. But the Golden Spur sold a decent rye. He pushed open the bat-wing doors, the sound of a poorly tuned piano crashing into him. The air was thick with blue smoke that burned his eyes and clung to the back of his throat. He kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the floorboards as he moved toward the bar. That was when he heard the sound. It was not a shout or a scream. It was a thick, wet sound, the crack of an open hand striking flesh, followed by a heavy, meaty thud as a body hit the wall. "You'll do what I say, girl. You'll do it now, or I'll break that pretty face." Elias stopped. He did not want to look. He had spent a decade turning away, practicing the art of non-existence. His business was flour, salt, and whiskey. Nothing more. But he did look. A large man. Abel, the owner of the Spur, had a fistful of a girl's hair. She was young, barely a woman. She wore a thin, stained chemise that was torn at the shoulder, her feet bare and black with filth on the sawdust-covered floor. A fresh, livid bruise was blooming on her cheek, and blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Abel was dragging her toward the back rooms, his other hand gripping her arm so tightly his knuckles were white. "Got a special customer waiting on you. Delia. He paid extra for the fresh stock, and he don't like to be kept." The girl, Delia, stumbled. She looked terrified, her eyes wide and hollow, but she wasn't fighting. That is what got to Elias. She wasn't screaming or clawing. Her body was rigid with a terror that went beyond pain, but she was limp in the man's grasp, as if she knew from long, hard experience that fighting only made the next part worse. Her eyes, desperate and empty, scanned the room. They looked for nothing, expected nothing. Then, as Abel gave her another violent shake. She whispered, just loud enough for Elias to hear over the din. "Don't make it worse. Abel, please." Elias felt the old sickness rise in him. It was a cold, acidic feeling in his gut. The same feeling that came before the gunfire, before the burning. He thought of the homestead, the fire, the screams he had spent 10 years trying to forget. He had not meant to intervene. It was not his business. His business was the ranch, the cattle, the silence. He was almost to the bar. He could buy his bottle and be gone. But his feet had stopped. His hand, instead of reaching for his wallet, went to his pocket. "Let her go." His voice was quiet. Too quiet for the noise of the saloon. But it cut through the piano and the laughter like a cold knife. Abel stopped. He turned, dragging Delia with him. He was a big man, gone soft in the middle, with a face like spoiled meat and small, calculating eyes. "What's that? Car," Abel sneered, his grip tightening. The girl let out a small, choked gasp. "You want to turn? She ain't on the menu till Silas is done with her, and he's paid for the whole night." Elias did not look at Abel. He looked at the girl. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. They were dead. They were the eyes of the woman at the homestead, the eyes of the boy in the trees. He didn't want this. He didn't want any part of this world. But the words were out before he could stop them, drawn from that same deep, cold place as his nightmares. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last of his coin. 2 heavy silver dollars. He threw them onto the scarred wooden bar. They landed with a solid, definitive thud that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. "She's mine now." The saloon went still. Even the piano player's hands froze above the keys. Elias did not look at Abel. He kept his gaze on the girl. He did not know her name, did not know her story. He only knew he could not, this time, stand by and watch. Abel stared at the 2 silver dollars. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. He looked from the coins to Elias, then back to the girl. $2. It was an insult for a full night, but for a quick trade, for an interruption. It was profit. And Silas was a mean drunk. The girl might not last the night anyway. This was easy money. $2, Abel chuckled, abruptly releasing Delia's hair. He shoved her forward with such force she stumbled, falling to her knees on the filthy floor, landing almost at Elias's feet. "She's all yours. Rancher. You bought the damaged goods." Abel scooped up the coins and slapped the bar. "Hell, for that kind of entertainment. Whiskey's on the house, boys." The noise of the saloon flooded back in, louder this time, filled with coarse laughter and the resumption of the piano. Elias hadn't moved. He stood there, a statue of worn denim and quiet guilt, looking down at the girl. She stayed on the floor for a long moment, crouched, her dark, matted hair hiding her face. She was trembling, small, sharp shudders that ran through her whole body. "Get up," Elias said, his voice flat. She rose slowly, unsteadily. She was so thin her bones seemed sharp beneath the thin, torn fabric. She wrapped her arms around herself, a desperate, futile attempt to cover her nakedness, her shame. She looked at him with an awful, practiced stillness. "Where?" she whispered, her voice rough, her eyes fixed on his chest. "The back room, or do you want to take me outside?" "I'm leaving town." She stared, her mind clearly struggling to understand. What do you expect?" she finally managed. "I expect nothing." "You paid $2. Her voice was a dry rasp. "A man pays $2. He expects something. You want me to kneel? Here?" Elias felt a flash of anger, but it was not at her. It was at the world that had taught her that question. He looked at the men at the bar, watching them, their eyes hungry and amused. "I'm going home," he said, his voice low and hard. He turned toward the door. "Come if you want a different road. Stay if you're comfortable on this one." He did not wait to see what she would do. He pushed through the bat-wing doors, the laughter of the saloon at his back, and stepped into the cold, clean air. He untied Bess, his hands shaking slightly. What had he done? What in God's name had he done? He had enough ghosts. He did not need a living one. He swung himself into the saddle, his hips screaming in protest. The pain was sharp, a fitting punishment for his foolishness. He gathered the reins, ready to put this town, this mistake, behind him. A shadow fell beside his horse. Delia stood there. She had found a ragged blanket somewhere inside, a sour-smelling thing that she had wrapped around her shoulders, covering the torn chemise. Her feet were still bare. The freezing mud of the street was already caking them. She looked up at him, her face pale, the bruise on her cheek a violent, angry purple in the gray afternoon light. She was terrified. Her eyes were wide, darting from the saloon door back to him. But she was there. Elias looked down at her for a long time. He saw the cold. He saw the fear. He saw a thing as trapped as a coyote in a snare. "You'll freeze," he said, his voice rough. "I've been cold before." He let out a long, tired breath that misted in the air. He could not leave her. He could not take her. He had done a damn fool thing, and now he had to live with it. He offered his hand. She flinched, a sharp, violent recoil, her eyes widening in panic. Elias held his hand steady. "The horse," he said, his voice flat, devoid of kindness or threat. "You can't walk." She hesitated, her eyes searching his for the trick, the lie. She found nothing. Just a cold, tired man on a patient horse. Slowly, as if expecting a blow, she put her small, grimy hand in his. It was light as a bird and cold as stone. He pulled her up, seating her in front of him on the saddle. She was small, barely taking up any room, but her presence was enormous. She was stiff as a board, her back rigid, her body angled away, not daring to lean against him. He nudged Bess into a walk. They rode out of Dry Creek in silence. Just another rancher and a woman, leaving the dust and the noise behind. The trail was long. It climbed out of the valley, winding up into the high desert hills. The air grew thinner, colder. The wind had a bite to it, a promise of the snow Elias had seen in the clouds. Delia did not speak for the first hour. She sat perched like a sparrow ready to fly, her body vibrating with a tension that was almost audible. Elias could feel her trembling, whether from cold or fear. He could not tell, probably both. He kept the pace steady. He was intensely, uncomfortably aware of her, the smell of her hair, musty and tinged with stale whiskey and saloon smoke, the way her small hands gripped the front of the saddle horn, her knuckles white. Finally, as the sun began to dip behind the western ridge, painting the sky in violent, bloody shades of orange and purple, she spoke. Her voice was a dry rasp. "What am I to you?" Elias kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "What do you mean? In the saloon, you said, 'She's mine now.' What does that mean?" She took a shaky breath. Am I your woman now? Your whore?" The words were ugly. She spat them out like poison, as if testing him. Elias thought for a long moment. The trail was narrow here, the canyon dropping away to their left into a sea of darkening pines. "It means Abel doesn't own you anymore." "So you own me?" Her voice was sharp. He stopped the horse. Bess flicked her ears, annoyed at the interruption. The wind whipped a strand of Delia's dark hair across her face. He looked down at the top of her head. He could not see her face. "No one owns you." She let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Everyone owns me. Abel owned me. Before him, Silas owned me. Before him, my stepfather. Men always own me. I just want to know the rules of the new owner." "There are no rules," Elias said. His voice tired. She twisted, wincing as her bare skin rubbed against the rough wool of his coat. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce in the dying light, burning with a cold fire he had not seen in the saloon. "Don't lie to me. Don't you ever lie to me. It's worse than hitting." Her voice was low, trembling with a desperate, furious energy. "What do I have to do? Cook? Clean? Service you? Just tell me. Tell me what I have to do to earn the $2. Elias looked into her eyes. He saw the trauma, the pain, the years of abuse. He saw a girl who had been broken and put back together with barbed wire. He saw a mirror of his own damaged world. "You're free," he said. The words felt strange in his mouth. Heavy, untrue. Her face crumpled. It was not relief, it was rage. "Free?" she hissed, her voice cracking. Free? A woman alone, with no money, no shoes, in a torn dress, in the middle of nowhere, with winter coming on? You call that free? That's just a different kind of cage, Mr. A bigger one. She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking, her face hidden. Elias had no answer for that. He nudged Bess forward. The word free had sounded hollow to him, too. He had not believed it any more than she did. They rode the last 2 miles in a heavy, frozen silence. The darkness fell fast, as it does in the mountains. A thick, smothering blanket. The first flakes of snow began to drift down, small and hard, stinging Elias's cheeks. Delia had gone quiet, her anger replaced by a deep, shuddering chill. After a while, her body gave in. She slumped against his chest, a small, cold weight, her body too exhausted to hold its own tension. Elias ignored the intimacy of it. He was a man carrying a package, that was all. His ranch was less a ranch and more a foothold. A small, sturdy cabin he had built himself. A barn and a few corrals, all tucked into a cold, isolated canyon north of town. The land was hard, unforgiving, but it was honest. It did not pretend to be anything but. He dismounted, his hip locking up from the cold and the extra weight. He reached up for Delia. She slid into his arms, her body limp, her head lolling. He set her on her feet. She swayed, her bare feet blue and numb on the frozen ground. He did not say a word. He half carried, half dragged her into the cabin. Inside, it was dark and cold, but it was out of the wind. He set her on a stool by the cold hearth, then moved with the practiced, economic efficiency of a man who lives alone. He struck a match. The lantern light flared, revealing a single, large room. It was sparse but clean. A rope bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove. His life. He built a fire in the stove, his stiff fingers fumbling with the kindling. Delia had not moved. She sat on the stool, the ragged blanket pulled at her feet, staring into the nascent flames, her face as pale as the snow outside. The snow was coming down harder now, a thick, white curtain. Winter had arrived early, and it had arrived with a vengeance. Elias watched the fire catch, then turned to her. She looked like a drowned thing, a ghost haunting his hearth. "You're tracking mud," he said. She looked down at her filthy feet, then back at him, her expression blank, uncomprehending. "There's a pump outside, water's cold, but there's a basin," he pointed, "and soap." He left her, going to a large wooden trunk at the foot of his bed. He pulled out a heavy wool shirt and a pair of trousers he used for mending. They would be ridiculously large on her, but they were warm, and they were clean. He tossed them onto the stool beside her. "Put these on." He turned his back, giving her what little privacy the room offered. He busied himself at the stove, putting a pot of coffee on, moving a heavy pot of stew closer to the heat. He heard her movements, the rustle of fabric, a sharp, pained intake of breath as she washed with the freezing water, the small sounds of a person trying to erase themselves. When he turned back, she was dressed. The shirt hung on her like a tent, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times. The trousers were cinched with a piece of rope she had found somewhere, but she was covered. "Good," he said. He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls. He handed one to her. She took it, but she did not eat. She just held it, letting the warmth soak into her frozen hands. Where do I sleep?" she asked, her voice small, her eyes on the floor. Elias looked at his bed. It was the only one. This was the moment. This was the moment that defined what he had done. This was the moment that would prove her right or wrong. "In there," he said, nodding to a small, narrow door beside the fireplace. She looked at the door, confused. Elias opened it. It was a small storage room, barely more than a closet. It smelled of leather, feed, and old wood. In one corner sat a narrow cot he used when he was too tired or too drunk on his own memories to make it to his real bed. "It's not much," he said, his voice gruff, "but it's warm." Delia looked at the cot. She looked at the main room. She looked at his bed. I'm sleeping in there?" "Yes. And you?" "I'm sleeping out here." She stared at him, her eyes wide with a profound, aching disbelief. This was a test. It had to be. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's just a cot," he grumbled. "Eat your stew." She ate. They ate in silence. The only sounds the scrape of spoons against tin and the rising howl of the wind outside. When they were done, she took the bowls without being asked, found the washing-up basin, and cleaned them. She moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency. She knew how to make herself useful. She knew how to earn her keep. "Good night," she said, not looking at him. "Good night." She disappeared into the small room and closed the door. Elias sat at the table for a long time, listening to the storm. He was tired. His hip was a ball of fire, and he had a woman in his storage room. He eventually got up, banked the fire, and blew out the lantern. He lay on his bed, fully clothed, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He listened. He heard her on the other side of the door. A small sound, a rustle, the scrape of wood on wood. She was bracing the door. He heard her drag a small keg or a heavy box against it, blocking it from the inside. Elias closed his eyes. He did not blame her. He lay awake for hours, waiting for a night that would be filled with sleep. Later, much later, he heard a sound that cut through the wind. She was crying. It was a silent, suffocating sound, the sound of someone who had learned long ago that making noise only brought more pain. The sound of a soul breaking in the dark. Elias turned over, facing the wall. He did not go to her. He did not comfort her. He just lay there, listening to the sound of her breaking, and hated himself, and the world, for it. He did not come in that night, or the next, or the night after that. Delia lay on the narrow cot, her body aching with a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The room was dark, but in her mind, she was still in the Golden Spur. She saw it all, every night, but tonight it was sharper, more cruel. She had been 10 years old when her mother died of the fever. Her stepfather, a man who had never looked at her with anything but cold calculation, had sold her to Abel 2 days after the funeral. "She's a good worker," he had said, his hand on Abel's shoulder, "and she'll be a looker. Once she fills out." Abel had looked at her, his eyes like fat, damp slugs. "We'll see." For the first 2 years, she had been a worker. Mucking out spittoons, washing glasses, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw and bleeding. Then, on her 13th birthday, Abel had brought her a new dress. Red. "You're done with the floors," he had said, his hand lingering on her hair, his touch making her skin crawl. "Time to start earning your keep, girl." Survival. That was what it was. Her soul had not been sold all at once. It had been chipped away, piece by piece, $1 at a time. She had learned to disconnect. She had learned to make her body a thing, separate from her mind. The mind was the only part they could not touch. But last month had been different. His name was Silas. The man Abel had been dragging her to tonight. He was new, a prospector with a mean streak and heavy, bruising hands. He liked to own things. He had cornered her in the storeroom a month ago. He had not just wanted her body. He had wanted her fear. He had wanted to break her. He had held a knife to her throat. "You're mine, little bird," he had whispered, his breath hot and sour. "No one else touches you. You hear me? You're my property." Delia had learned that fighting back was a mistake. But something in her had snapped. The years of silence, of endurance, of "don't make it worse," had finally broken. She had not run. She had not screamed. She had waited. She had waited until he was asleep, drunk on whiskey and his own power. She had taken his knife, She remembered the weight of it in her hand. She had stood over him, watching him snore. She had tried to run. She had gotten as far as the edge of town, but Abel's men had caught her. They had dragged her back. Abel had beaten her, not for running, but for trying to run from Silas. "He paid for exclusive rights, you stupid girl," Abel had spat, his hand cracking across her face. "You try that again. I'll kill you myself." She had been locked in the cellar for a week. Tonight was the first night she had been let out. And Silas was back. When Abel had grabbed her, she had known. This was not just another night. This was an ending. Silas would not be gentle. He would be punishing her for her defiance. Then the rancher, Elias. She did not understand him. He had not hit her. He had not touched her. He had given her a room, a separate room. It was a trick. It had to be. She braced her back against the door, her knees drawn up. He would come. They always came. They would be patient, pretend to be kind, but in the end, they always came. But he had not. She listened to the sound of his breathing in the other room, slow and steady. She listened to the storm. The tears came, hot and silent. She wept not from fear, but from confusion. It was the confusion that hurt the most. Elias did not sleep. He drifted. He was back in the war. Not the battles. He had been good at the battles. He had been a scout for the Union, moving through the trees like smoke, a rifle in his hand, a clear objective. It was the other times, the quiet times, the necessary times. He was in Tennessee. The woods were wet, smelling of pine and damp earth. He was with another scout, a man named Bowen. They had been tracking a Confederate sniper. The trail led to a small homestead, a cabin much like his own. "He's in there," Bowen had said. "I see a woman, a child," Elias had replied, his spyglass trained on the cabin window. "They're harboring him. They're part of it." "We can wait him out," Elias had insisted. But Bowen was impatient. He was a man who liked fire. "We burn him out," Bowen said, pulling a torch from his pack. "No. It's war. Carr, you gonna be soft?" Elias had not stopped him. He had stood there, in the trees, his rifle in his hand, and he had watched. The fire had caught fast. The dry wood of the cabin went up like a match. The screaming started. It was not the sniper. It was the woman and the child. They had run out, their clothes aflame. Elias had just stood there. He could not move. He could not breathe. Bowen had raised his rifle. No witnesses. Elias had shot Bowen. He had shot him in the chest, right then and there, but it was too late. The woman and the child. They were gone. He woke up with a gasp, the smell of smoke in his nostrils. He sat bolt upright. The cabin was dark. The fire was low. The only smell was wood smoke from the chimney and the faint, cold scent of the snow. He was drenched in sweat. He heard a sound from the other room, a sharp, terrified gasp. His own nightmare had woken her. "It's nothing," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Just a dream." He heard her shift, the creak of the cot, but she did not answer. He got up, added a log to the fire, and sat at the table. He would not sleep again tonight. The next morning, the world was white. The snow had fallen all night, thick and heavy. The canyon was buried. They were cut off. When Delia emerged from her room, her eyes puffy, her face pale, she found Elias at the stove. Coffee already made. She had not braced the door. "Morning," he grunted. "Morning." He handed her a mug of coffee. It was black and bitter, but it was hot. "We're snowed in," he said, stating the obvious. "How long?" "A week, maybe 2. She absorbed this. She nodded. What do I do?" Elias looked at her. "What do you mean? What work do you have for me?" "The animals need feeding. The barn needs mucking. Wood needs to be chopped." "I can do that." "I do that?" "I can help," she insisted, her voice small but firm. Elias sighed. He did not want help. He wanted silence. But he looked at her, at the desperation to be useful, and nodded. "Fine. Find the boots by the door. They'll be too big. Wear 2 pairs of socks." And so their life began. It was a life of silent work. They moved around each other. Two ghosts in a small cabin, two planets in a cold, silent orbit. Elias would chop wood, his breath pluming in the cold, the axe rising and falling, each solid thud a punctuation mark in the vast silence. He would watch her. She was stronger than she looked. She hauled water from the pump, her thin arms straining, but she never complained. She never spoke unless spoken to. Delia would feed the chickens, scattering the grain. She would stand for long minutes, just watching them peck, as if she had never seen such a simple, honest thing. She would watch Elias. He moved with a painful grace, his body stiff, but his hands, when he mended a piece of harness, were gentle and sure. They rarely spoke. More wood. Stew's hot. Pass the salt. They ate at the small table, the silence stretching between them, thick and heavy as the snow outside. Elias would watch her hands. They were small, scarred, the nails broken, but they were capable. Delia would watch his eyes. They were distant, cold, and full of shadows. But sometimes, when he looked at the fire, or at his horse, she saw something else, a flicker of warmth, a deep, profound sadness. They were two strangers, trapped by a storm, trapped by their own histories, and in the cold, white silence of the canyon, they began the slow, painful work of seeing each other, both carrying their pasts like lead weights, afraid that at any moment, the other would see the truth. The snow held for 10 days. Life in the canyon settled into a hard, spare rhythm, dictated by the needs of the body and the demands of the cold. They shared the small space with the cautious, wary movements of two predators trapped in the same cage. They spoke in short, necessary sentences, their voices hushed by the heavy, insulating silence of the snow. The wood is low. I'll chop more. Coffee is hot. The cow needs milking. Delia had taken over the milking of the single, hardy cow Elias kept. He had found her in the barn the second morning, sitting on the stool, her hands, still raw from the saloon, struggling with the animal. He had watched from the doorway for a full minute before speaking. "You have to be gentle, but firm," he had said, his voice rough in the frozen air. She had jumped, nearly upsetting the pail. "I know how." He had left her to it. When he came back, she had a meager amount of milk in the bottom of the bucket, but she had done it. They found their orbits. He handled the heavy work, breaking ice at the trough, clearing paths to the barn, and the endless, aching work of the axe. She handled the cabin, the cooking, the mending, the cleaning. She mended his heavy wool coat, her stitches small and tight, a neat, visible scar on the old fabric. He found himself looking at the stitches when she was not around, tracing the thread with a calloused finger. She was a ghost at his table. She made herself small, tucking her knees in, her eyes always on her plate. She seemed to hold her breath, as if waiting for a blow to fall, or for the rules of this strange, quiet arrangement to finally be explained to her. He avoided her. He stayed outside until the cold drove him in, his hip a blaze of white-hot agony. He would find the cabin warm, the smell of beans and salt pork filling the air, and she would be nowhere to be seen, already retreated to her small cot in the storeroom, the door firmly closed. This silent truce, this careful avoidance, lasted until the snow receded and the world outside the canyon began to intrude. A man's voice, loud and booming, shattered the morning quiet. "Ho, the cabin! Elias Carr, you in there, you old hermit?" Elias, who had been splitting kindling, froze. He saw Delia's face in the small cabin window, a flash of white, before she vanished from view. A man on a mule, wrapped in greasy-looking furs, was making his way up the path. Elias knew him. Jed Slocum, a local trapper who smelled like beaver grease and rotten meat. Elias walked slowly to the cabin door, his axe still in his hand, blocking the entryway with his body. "Jed," Elias said. It was not a greeting. "Cold one, ain't it?" Jed laughed, a wet, hacking sound. He swung off the mule, his eyes small and bright like a boar's, darted past Elias, peering into the shadows of the cabin. "Heard the snow trapped you up here? Ran low on salt." "I've got some to spare," Elias said, unmoving. "Good man." Jed stamped his feet, slapping his arms. "Figure I'd see. Whoa!" His voice dropped. Delia had moved, believing the exchange was over, and a sliver of firelight had caught her. Jed's gaze fixed on the spot. He grinned, a slow spreading of thin lips over yellow teeth. Well, Carr," Jed said, his voice dropping to a low, suggestive drawl. "I see why you ain't been to Dry Creek. Got yourself some company. And here I thought you was just polishing your rifle all winter." Elias said nothing. His hand tightened on the axe handle. The silence stretched, cold and sharp. Jed, mistaking the silence for shyness, pushed on. "Where'd you find one like that? She ain't from around here?" He took a step closer, trying to look past Elias's shoulder. "Warmer than a buffalo robe, I'd wager." "The salt," Elias said, his voice flat. "It's in the barn." He turned and walked toward the barn, not waiting to see if Jed followed. He expected Jed to make another comment, but the trapper just chuckled and followed him. The transaction was quick. Elias measured out the salt. Jed traded 2 beaver pelts and a fox. "She clean?" Jed asked, tying the salt bag to his mule. Elias did not look up from coiling the rope. "Just asking," Jed said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "A man gets curious, lonely up here. Don't blame you for finding a way to pass the time." Elias said nothing. He handed Jed the lead rope. Jed mounted, then paused, looking back at the cabin. The door was closed. "You keep her hid well," Jed said, his smile gone, his eyes now calculating. "Abel, down at the spur. He's missing one. Said a girl ran off on him, owed him money. Looked a bit like that one." The air thickened. "This one," Elias said, his voice a low growl, "is my business." Jed held his gaze for a long moment, then shrugged. "Ain't no concern of mine, long as the pelts is good." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the snow near Elias's feet, then nudged the mule into motion. Elias stood there until the sound of the mule's progress was swallowed by the canyon. He stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones. But it was not the cold that made him shake. It was the rage. It was the old, familiar, acidic taste of violence that rose in his throat, the urge to have taken the axe, not to the wood, but to Jed Slocum, had been terrifyingly strong. He went back inside, his boot heels hitting the floorboards like hammers. Delia was standing by the stove, her hands twisting in the fabric of his old shirt. She was pale, her eyes wide. "He's gone," Elias said. The words came out harsh, clipped. "Next time you hear a man, you go to your room, you stay there. You don't make a sound." She flinched, as if he had struck her. Her chin came up, a small, defiant gesture that he was beginning to recognize. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking but hard. "Because I said so." "Why?" she insisted, stepping away from the stove, toward him. "Are you afraid he'll know what I am? Are you ashamed? This has nothing to do. You're ashamed he saw me," she accused, her voice rising, cracking with an awful, brittle pain. "You're ashamed he'll go back to town and tell everyone that Elias Carr, the quiet rancher, bought himself a saloon whore. Is that it? Does it spoil your clean air? You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. "I know what I am," she cried. "I know what that look means. I've seen it every day for 5 years, but I ain't never seen a man ashamed of buying it. I've only seen them ashamed of being seen." She confronted him, her small body vibrating with fury and a despair so deep he could not fathom it. "Why pretend you care what happens to me?" she spat. "You bought me. You own me. Just tell me the rules. Don't hide me like I'm a sickness." Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked at her, at this wild, wounded girl, and he saw a mirror of his own rage. He was not ashamed of her. He was terrified of the thing she woke up in him. He was terrified of the part of him that had wanted to kill Jed for looking at her. That part was the scout. That part was the man who had burned a homestead. That part was the animal he had come up here to starve to death. And this girl, with her haunted eyes and her defiant pain. She was feeding it. He said nothing. He could not explain that he was warning her, not to protect his reputation, but to protect her from the world, and to protect the world from him. He turned his back on her. He stalked out of the cabin, grabbed the axe, and attacked the woodpile. He swung the axe until his shoulders burned, until his hip was a blinding sheet of pain, and until the cold sweat froze on his face. He swung until he was too exhausted to feel anything at all. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was not a quiet of healing, but a tight, toxic quiet, thick with unspoken words and sharp with mutual pain. Elias lay on his bed. He had not eaten. He had rubbed his hip with liniment until the smell burned his nostrils, but it did no good. The pain was too deep. He heard the creak of her door. He did not move. He lay on his back, staring into the darkness, listening. Her bare feet made no sound on the wood floor. He only knew she was there by a sudden, faint change in the air, a shift in the shadows near his bed. "Elias?" Her voice was a whisper. He did not answer. She moved closer. He could smell the soap on her, and the faint, sad smell of wood smoke. She was kneeling beside his bed. He turned his head. In the faint, dying glow of the fire's embers, he could see her. She was wearing only a thin wool blanket, draped around her small shoulders. It was the only thing she had, the only currency she understood. "Do I disgust you?" The question was so quiet, so broken. It was almost not a sound at all. Elias froze. He stared at her. He saw her thin, pale shoulders. He saw the shadow of her collarbone. He saw the dark, empty pits of her eyes, full of a terrible, practiced resignation. She was offering the only thing she had left to offer, desperate to settle the debt, to fix what she had broken that afternoon, to prove she was not, in fact, a sickness. He saw the sacrifice, and it disgusted him. Not her, never her, but the world that had taught her this was the only answer, the world that had made her kneel. He felt a profound, suffocating sickness. He could not speak. He could not breathe. He did the only thing he could. He turned away. A sharp, violent movement, turning his back to her, facing the cold wall. He heard the sound she made, a small, choked gasp, as if he had plunged a knife into her. It was the sound of a last hope dying. He heard her stand up. He heard the whisper of her feet as she walked back to her room. He heard the door close, and this time, he heard the faint sound of the bar sliding into place. He lay there, staring at the wall, his eyes burning. He had failed her. He had wanted to tell her she did not disgust him. He had wanted to tell her that she was the only thing in 10 years that had made him feel anything at all, and it terrified him. But he had said nothing, and so he had given her the cruelest answer of all. He heard her crying, a silent, shuddering soblet into a pillow, the sound of a creature trying to break without making a sound. Elias closed his eyes, and the old dreams came for him, filled with fire and the smell of burning flesh. The next morning, he woke before dawn. The cabin was freezing. The fire in the stove was dead. He sat up. The cabin was empty. The door to her storeroom was wide open. The cot was empty, the blanket folded neatly. A cold, sharp dread, worse than the winter air, seized him. "Delia?" His voice was a croak. Silence. He pulled on his boots, not bothering with socks, grabbing his heavy coat. He ran outside, the snow crunching under his feet. "Delia!" The canyon was gray. The world held in a breathless, pre-dawn hush. Had she run? Had she tried to walk to Dry Creek in the dark? She would be dead in an hour. He checked the barn, his heart a cold hammer in his chest. He found her in the empty stall, the one furthest from the door. She had curled up in a shallow pile of old hay, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was not moving. "Delia." He touched her shoulder. She was rigid. Her skin, where it was exposed at her neck, was the color of blue-white ice. He grabbed her, shaking her. "Delia!" Her head lolled back, her eyes closed. Her hands, curled into fists, were stiff, not just cold, frozen. He did not think. He reacted. He scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing. A bundle of sticks and frozen clothes. He ran from the barn, his bad hip screaming in protest, his breath tearing in his chest. He burst into the cabin, kicked the door shut, and carried her straight to the stove. He laid her on the bearskin rug, his hands shaking so badly he could barely strike a match. He got the fire going, feeding it kindling, then larger logs, until the stove roared with heat. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow, a faint, rattling sound. He looked at his bed. It was the warmest place in the cabin, the sheets still holding a trace of his own body heat. He lifted her again, carried her the 4 steps, and laid her on his cot. He stripped the frozen, damp trousers and shirt he had given her from her body, his movements rough, impersonal, focused only on the cold. She was wearing the thin chemise from the saloon underneath. He pulled his heavy wool blankets from the bed, piling them on top of her. And then he sat. He took her hands, still curled and stiff, and began to rub them. He rubbed them hard, his calloused thumbs digging into her palms, forcing blood, forcing life. He rubbed until his own skin was raw. She moaned, a low, animal sound of pain. As the feeling began to return, her fingers twitched, then spasmed. He did not stop. He sat there, in the dark, cold cabin. As the sun began to rise, he sat in the chair by the bed, his rifle across his lap, and he watched her. He watched the color slowly, painfully, seep back into her face. He watched her eyelids flutter. He watched her live. He must have drifted off. He woke when she spoke, his hand automatically gripping the rifle. The sun was high. The cabin was warm. She was awake, staring at him. She was in his bed, under his blankets. He was in the chair. Her voice was a dry, broken croak. "Why?" "You were freezing," he said. His own voice was rough. "You should have left me." "I don't leave people to freeze," he said, the words sharp. He looked away, at the wall, at the memory of fire. She was quiet for a long time. He could feel her watching him. "The other men," she finally said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. She was not talking to him. She was talking to the blankets, to the ceiling, to the ghosts in the room. They just came and went, most of them. You learn to go away. You go somewhere inside your head. You just let them use the outside part. Elias sat like a stone. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just listened. "You sell it?" she whispered, her eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling. "A piece at a time. $1 for this piece, $2 for that one. Until one day you look down and you wonder if there's anything left to sell. You wonder if you're even there at all." He closed his eyes. "The last one, Silas." Her voice changed. It became thinner, sharper, like a new whetted blade. He was different. He didn't just want the use. He wanted to own all of it. He wanted to own my breath. He said I was his property. He liked to say that. She took a shaky breath. He liked to hurt, and he said he'd never stop, that I was his for good. She paused. "So I stabbed him." Elias opened his eyes. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, her small, frozen hands clenching the rough wool of his blanket. "I took his knife," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "When he was sleeping. I don't know if he's dead. I didn't look back. I just ran. Abel's men caught me." She finally turned her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were not pleading. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were just empty. "I thought you should know," she said. Elias looked at her for a long time. He saw the girl from the saloon. He saw the woman who had knelt by his bed. He saw the frozen child in the barn. He had no words of comfort. He had no judgment. He had, in his life, done so much worse. "He alive?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "I hope not." He nodded. Once, a slow, heavy acceptance. "Get some sleep. You're safe here." That night, the air in the cabin was new. The confession had lanced a boil. The silence was still there, but it was no longer heavy. It was a shared space. She was cooking, her movements slow, still stiff from the cold. He was at the table, cleaning his rifle, the familiar smell of oil and steel filling the room. She moved past him to get a pot. Her hip brushed his shoulder. An accident. But then, as she reached for the shelf, her hand brushed his. His hand was on the table. Hers, reaching for a tin of flour, grazed his knuckles. It was nothing, a feather-light touch. But they both froze. He stopped breathing. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor in her fingers. It was the first time they had touched in a way that was not violence or rescue. He did not pull away. She did not pull away. He looked at her hand, small and scarred, resting for a fraction of a second against his own, which was large, calloused, and stained with grease. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his hand over, palm up. His fingers brushed the back of her hand. A jolt went through both of them. He saw her sharp intake of breath. He felt his own heart slam against his ribs. It was more intimate than any night he had ever spent with a woman. It was terrifying. He looked up. She was looking at him, her eyes wide, her lips parted. She was not afraid. She was just watching, waiting. He did not know what he was doing. He was a man drowning, and she was the only solid thing in the water. He leaned in. It was slow, agonizingly slow. A question, a plea. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of grief. It was chapped lips against chapped lips. It tasted of salt and coffee and the faint, metallic tang of fear. It was soft. It was hesitant. It was a kiss that said, "I am as broken as you are." He pulled away, his breath shuddering. He looked at her, horrified at what he had done, at the line he had crossed. He had taken her pain and her confession, and he had, what? Tainted it. But she did not look tainted. She did not look broken. She looked at him, her gaze steady, her eyes clear. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered. Elias looked at her, at this small, fierce, impossible creature. He saw her courage, her resilience, her refusal to be truly destroyed, and he saw his own weakness, his own fear. "That's what I'm afraid of," he said. That kiss was a stone dropped into a frozen pond. The surface, still and silent for so long, now bore a single, violent fracture. The days that followed were not easier. They were harder. The kiss had broken the rules of their careful, silent orbit, and neither of them knew what the new rules were. The weather, as if sensing their turmoil, turned colder. The brief thaw reversed itself, and a new storm, heavier and more vicious than the first, swept down from the north. It howled through the canyon, burying the cabin to its windows, sealing them in a world that was only white snow, gray sky, and the four walls of the cabin. They were not just trapped for a week. They were buried for the winter. This new, deeper isolation changed their rhythm. The silence, which had been a barrier, now became a shared language. They could no longer retreat to the barn or the woodpile. They were forced into a proximity that was more intimate than any touch. They ate 3 meals a day, facing each other over the small table, the lamplight carving a small, warm circle in the vast, cold darkness. She told him, in her quiet, flat voice, about her mother, how she had loved the color yellow, how she had died in a heat wave in St. Louis, her hand so hot it felt like a stove lid. He told her, in his gruff, clipped sentences, about his horse, Bess, how he had found her lame, with a shoddy shoe, and bought her for $5 from a man who was going to shoot her, how he had spent a month nursing her, sleeping in the barn, until she was strong. One afternoon, the stovepipe clogged, filling the cabin with thick, acrid smoke. They had burst out the door, coughing and weeping, their eyes streaming. When they had caught their breath in the freezing air, Elias, his face smeared with soot, had looked at Delia, her own face a mask of black. A strange sound had rumbled in his chest. It was a laugh. It was dry, rusty, like an old hinge, but it was a laugh. She had stared at him, shocked, and then a small, hesitant smile had touched her own lips. They argued. He told her she was using too much flour in the biscuits. She told him he stacked the firewood all wrong. with no air to let it dry. They were small, stupid arguments, the kind of arguments people have who are safe enough to disagree. They were the arguments of a life being lived, not just endured. But underneath this strange, domestic peace, the tension simmered. The kiss remained unspoken. A ghost that sat at the table with them. A third presence in the small, warm room. Delia had changed. The girl who had been small and silent, who had tried to make herself invisible, was gone. In her place was a woman. She had confessed her greatest sin, and he had not turned her out. He had, in fact, kissed her. This knowledge had given her a new, quiet power. She was no longer just a survivor. She was testing the bounds of what it meant to be seen. She began to push. It was subtle at first. She stopped wearing the heavy, bunched-up trousers. She mended the torn chemise, and when she worked in the cabin, she wore only that and the oversized wool shirt he had given her. It came down to her knees, but it was not the shapeless armor the trousers had been. He would look up from mending a harness and find her kneading dough, the firelight outlining the shape of her leg, the curve of her calf. He would look away, his heart slamming against his ribs, his hands suddenly clumsy. When they passed in the narrow space between the stove and the table, she no longer angled her body away, shrinking to let him pass. She held her ground. Her shoulder would brush his arm. Her hip would press against his for a fraction of a second. He would freeze, his entire body rigid. She would murmur, "Pardon me," and her voice would be low, her breath warm on his neck. He began to retreat again. He became gruff, silent. He spent hours in the barn, in the freezing cold, doing unnecessary work, just to be away from her. He was terrified, not of her, but of the thing she was waking in him. The man who had been a scout, the man who had lived on instinct and violence, was a man of simple, brutal appetites. He had kept that man caged for 10 years. He could feel the bars of the cage beginning to groan. One night, the blizzard was so loud it sounded like a living thing, a giant animal trying to claw its way into the cabin. They had eaten in silence, the tension a tangible thing, a coiled snake on the floor between them. Elias sat at the table, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that week, his hands moving over the familiar, cold metal. Delia was by the fire, brushing her hair. He had found an old tortoiseshell comb in his mother's trunk and given it to her. She was sitting on the rug, the firelight turning her dark hair to spun copper. She was wearing only the long shirt. He heard her stop. He heard her set the comb on the hearth. "Elias?" His hand stilled. "What? Are you awake?" It was a strange question. He was sitting 5 feet from her, the lantern bright. "I'm awake." She stood up. She did not turn around. She just stood, facing the fire, her back to him. "Why did you kiss me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and clear above the howl of the wind. Elias rubbed a cloth over the rifle barrel, his movements jerky. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She turned. Her face was in shadow, her body a silhouette against the bright, dancing flames. "You kissed me, and then you turned away from me. Like I was that trapper. Like I was something dirty." "No," he said, his voice a low growl. "Not you, me." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not a good man. Delia, it means I'm not the man you should be testing." She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. She stopped when she was standing right beside his chair, so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "You're afraid of me," she whispered. He looked up at her. Her face was cast in shadow, her eyes unreadable. "I'm afraid of me," he said, his voice rough. It was the echo of their conversation, weeks ago, but the meaning was entirely new. She looked down at him, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "Good," she whispered. "So am I." She reached out, her hand hesitant, and touched his face. Her fingers were warm. They traced the rough beard on his cheek, the old, white scar at his temple. He closed his eyes. He should pull away. He should stand up. He should run back to the barn. Instead, His hand came up and covered hers, pressing her palm flat against his cheek. He held it there, his own hand rough and trembling. He turned his face, his lips pressing into the center of her palm. It was a kiss of surrender. She made a small sound in the back of her throat, a sound of pain or of release. He pulled her down, not gently. He grabbed her by the shirt, his other hand going to her waist, and pulled her onto his lap. She landed with a gasp, straddling him. He was still in the chair. He looked at her, his eyes dark, his face a mask of old pain. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, his voice broken. "I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know what gentle is," she whispered back, her hands on his shoulders, her gaze locked with his. "I only know how to endure." "This won't be that," he said, his voice raw. "Then show me." He did not kiss her. He stood, lifting her with him, his arms locked around her. He carried her the 2 steps to his bed and laid her down. He did not undress her. He did not undress himself. He simply followed her down, his body covering hers, his mouth finding hers in the darkness. It was a desperate, frantic collision. It was not lovemaking. It was a confession of bodies. It was 2 survivors clinging to each other in a storm, seeking not pleasure, but proof that they were still alive. His hands were rough, tangled in her hair, gripping her hips. Her nails dug into his shoulders, her body arching up to meet his. It was a fight. It was a drowning. It was a desperate, gasping, frantic need to feel something other than cold and pain. He was inside her, and she cried out, a sharp, broken sound. He froze, his old ghosts screaming at him. "Did I hurt you?" he gasped, his voice a wreck. She opened her eyes. They were inches from his, and they were filled with tears, but they were not tears of pain. They were clear. They were seeing him. "No!" she panted, her hands coming up to grip his face. "Just stay. Don't go away." He stayed. He moved. And it was no longer a fight. It was a rhythm. It was a prayer. It was the first honest thing he had done in 10 years. After, they lay in the tangled blankets. The blizzard screamed. But inside the cabin, there was a profound, exhausted peace. He was on his back, staring at the ceiling. She was curled against his side, her head on his chest, her arm thrown over his stomach. He could feel her breath, warm against his skin through his shirt. He had not known such a thing existed. This quiet. He felt her stir. She was listening to his heart. He felt the breakdown coming. It was a tremor, deep in his chest. The walls he had built, the ones that had stood for a decade, were crumbling. "Elias," she murmured. A sound tore from his throat, a sob. It was a dry, ugly sound, the sound of a man who had forgotten how to cry. He told her in the dark, his voice a low, broken monotone. "During the war, I was a scout. We were good. We were the best." He choked on the word. We were tracking a runner. A kid. He couldn't have been more than 15. In a butternut uniform, all torn. He was running. Elias, just running. He was scared. He wasn't armed. He dropped his satchel. He paused, the memory filling the room. My partner said to let him go. He was just a boy. But orders were to stop all communications. I raised my rifle. He was running, just trying to get back to his ma. Probably, I shot him, in the back. He just fell. Elias was shaking now, a violent, bone-deep tremor. I went over. He was so young, looked just like my cousin. He was just a boy. A boy. He turned his head, burying his face in the pillow, his shoulders heaving. "I don't get to be clean," he whispered, the words muffled, soaked in a decade of guilt. "I'm not a good man. Delia, I'm a man who shoots boys in the back." He waited for her to move away. He waited for her to get up, to go to her room, to recoil from the monster he had finally shown her. Instead, he felt her hand on his cheek. It was gentle. She turned his face toward hers. In the faint, gray light of the snowbound window, he could see her eyes. They were not full of disgust. They were not full of pity. They were full of a deep, profound and terrible understanding. She had seen his darkness, and it had not frightened her. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear. "Then I'm yours," she whispered. It was not a promise of submission. It was a vow of equals. It was an absolution that only another broken soul could give. Weeks passed. The blizzard broke. A false spring came, and then another, harder snow. But in the cabin, the ice had been broken. They were no longer two people. They were a pair. They moved as one. They slept in his bed every night. They worked, they ate, they talked. He taught her how to use a rifle. She taught him how to make bread that did not taste like a rock. One bright, cold afternoon in what must have been March, they heard a sound. It was not the wind. It was not the cry of a hawk. It was a horse. Elias was outside, mending a corral rail. He looked up. A man was riding into the canyon. He was not Jed Slocum. This man sat tall in the saddle. He wore a heavy, dark coat, and even from a distance, Elias could see the glint of a badge on his chest. "Delia," Elias called, his voice calm but sharp. "Go inside. Your room. Stay." She, who had been feeding the chickens, did not question. She dropped the grain bag and ran. Elias leaned against the corral, his hammer in his hand. As the man rode up, the man was clean-shaven, with cold, pale blue eyes. He looked at Elias, at the cabin, at the small, tidy homestead. "Elias Carr?" the man asked. His voice was polite. "That's me. U.S. Deputy Marshal, name's Harlan." He did not offer a hand. He scanned the property. "You've been snowed in, I take it, most of the winter," Elias agreed. "Heard you were a loner." "I am." The marshal's gaze lingered on the cabin. "I'm looking for a girl. Name of Delia, ran from the Golden Spur in Dry Creek. Owed a man, Abel, a great deal of money. But more than that, she near killed another man, a prospector, Silas Croft." Elias kept his expression flat. He just watched the man. "Waiting. You seen a girl like that? Carr? Small, dark hair. Scared looking?" Elias spat into the snow near his feet. "Saw a girl," he said, his voice a bored drawl. "Weeks ago, before the last big snow. Looked half frozen. Said she was going north, to the mining camps in Montana. And I pointed her north. She kept going. Figure she's dead in a drift by now. It's a hard road." Marshal Harlan watched him for a long, silent minute. The only sound was the jingle of his horse's bridle. "Funny," Harlan said, his polite tone never wavering. "That's a small cabin. Carr. But I see 2 sets of tracks to the barn, different boot sizes, and I smell coffee for 2. Elias did not flinch. "I like coffee." Harlan smiled. It was a thin, cold smile that did not touch his eyes. "Silas Croft. He's not a forgiving man. He's got papers on her. Says she stole from him. Says she tried to murder him. He's got a lot of friends." He gathered his reins. "I don't believe you. Carr, a man who lies this badly. He's got something to hide." He turned his horse. "I'll be back, and I won't be alone. You tell that girl, the one you didn't see, that running is over." The marshal nudged his horse into a walk, riding out of the canyon, his back straight, his purpose clear. Elias stood there, his knuckles white on the hammer, until the man was gone. He went inside. Delia was standing by the closed storeroom door. She was white as the snow outside. She was not packing. She was just frozen. "He's alive," she whispered. It was not a question. "Silas, he's alive." "He's just a man," Elias said, his voice rough. "No," she said, and a terrible, frantic energy filled her. She flew at him, her eyes wild. "You don't understand!" She began to pace, her hands twisting, her body vibrating with a terror he had not seen since the first night. "I have to go," she said, her voice a frantic whisper. "I have to run. He'll kill you for hiding me. He'll find me. He'll kill us both." She ran to her room, pulling out the old, ragged clothes she had arrived in. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold them. Elias blocked the door to the cabin. "No more running. You don't know what I did," she screamed, a raw, ragged sound that was full of all the horror of her life. She beat her fists against his chest. "You don't know." "You told me," he said, holding her wrists. "You told me. You stabbed him." "I didn't just stab him," she wailed, the final, awful truth pouring out of her. "He wasn't just a man. He wasn't a customer. He was my owner." Elias froze. "Abel sold me to him," she sobbed, collapsing against his chest. The fight gone, replaced by a devastating, crushing despair. "My papers. He had my papers. He said he was taking me to Texas, to a house. He said I'd never see the sun again. He liked to use the knife, just to scare me. I took it. I took it when he was asleep. I thought I killed him. I wanted him dead. I prayed he was dead." She clutched the front of his shirt, her voice muffled, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. "If he's alive, Elias, he won't just kill me. He'll take me back, and he will never, ever stop." He blocked the cabin door with his body. Delia, her face a mask of pale, frantic terror, was holding the ragged, filthy chemise she had arrived in, her knuckles white. "Let me go," she whispered, her voice raw. "No." His voice was a low growl. He stood like a stone, a wall of worn denim and quiet finality. "Elias, please," she begged, and the plea tore at him. "He'll kill you. You don't know him. He won't just ride on. He'll kill you for hiding me. He'll burn this place. He'll kill you, and then he'll take me." "And where will you go?" he asked, his voice rough. "You'll run. Where to? North. You'll be dead in 2 days. The snow's still too deep. It's better than what he'll do to me," she sobbed, her body starting to shake. "It's better than what he'll do to you." "Stop," he said. He took a step toward her, and she flinched back, her eyes wild. He stopped. "Just stop. You've been running your whole life. You ran from him. You ran from Abel. You tried to run from me. Where does it end? It ends when he's dead. Or I am." "No," he said, and his voice was so low, so heavy, it seemed to shake the floorboards. "If you walk out that door, it won't be freedom. It'll be running forever. You'll be looking over your shoulder every minute, in every town, at every man. You'll be his, even if he never finds you. You'll be his prisoner, forever." "So what?" she screamed, the sound tearing from her. "What is the other choice? You'll stand against a marshal, against his men, for me?" She threw the ragged chemise at his feet. "For this? For a whore you bought for $2 silver? Is that what you think you are? A hero?" The acid in her words was meant to push him away, to save him from his own foolishness. She hit him with her small, balled fists, beating against his chest. A desperate, frantic rhythm of terror. "Let me go! Let me go! I won't have your death on my hands!" He didn't flinch. He let her strike him, his face a mask of old, settled pain. He let her wail. He let her fight, until her strength was spent. When she was done, her fists just resting on his chest, her body shaking with sobs, he brought his hands up and gently, firmly, held her wrists. "I'm not a hero," he said, his voice raw. "I'm not, but I'm not running, and neither are you." She looked up at him, her face wet, her eyes broken. "Why? Why would you do this? I'm nothing. I'm just used goods." He looked down at her, at the raw, terrible pain she carried. And he saw his own reflection. He saw the same old guilt, the same brand of being unclean. "I don't know," he whispered, his own voice breaking. I can't let him. I won't." He paused, the words heavy, tasting like rust. "Delia, let me fight for you, please." The word please broke her. It was not a command. It was not an order. It was a plea, from one broken thing to another. She collapsed against him, her face buried in his shirt, and for the first time she did not cry in silence. She wept, loud and long, a storm of grief that had been held back for a lifetime. He just held her. He held her, his arms a tight, unmoving circle, as the last of her fight drained away, replaced by a cold, shared terror. That night, they did not speak. The fight had taken every word from them, leaving only a hollow, aching void. The cabin was a tomb, the wind outside a low moan. They moved around each other. Two ghosts, their bodies heavy with the knowledge of what was coming. He did not go to the barn. She did not go to her storeroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. She stood by the fire, her hands unlaced, watching the flames. "Come here," he said, his voice quiet. She turned, her eyes wide. "Come," he said again, and he held out a hand. She walked to him, slow, hesitant. She did not take his hand. She just stood before him. He reached out and touched her face. His thumb, calloused and rough, traced the faint, yellowed line of the bruise Abel had given her. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Elias," she whispered, and her voice was full of a terrible, aching sadness. He pulled her down onto the bed. They lay, fully clothed, tangled in the blankets. The fear a third, cold person between them. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of their first time. It was slow. It was sad. It tasted of salt, of her tears, of his own fear. His hands moved over her, not in passion, but as if he were memorizing her. The line of her jaw, the sharp, bird-like bones of her shoulders, the small, scarred hands that she tucked against his chest. She held on to him, her fingers gripping his shirt, as if he were a rock and she were drowning. They made love as if they were already dead. A slow, mournful dance of two people who had nothing left but this. It was a goodbye. It was a final, desperate act of defiance, a way of saying we were here, we were alive, before the darkness came. When it was over, they did not sleep. They lay side by side, his arm heavy over her waist, her head on his shoulder. They listened to the wind. They listened for the sound of horses. She woke before dawn, to the smell of oil and steel. The bed beside her was empty and cold. A dim gray light filtered through the snow-caked window. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her, and saw him. He was not the rancher she knew. He was sitting at the table, the lantern turned low. Before him, in neat, ordered pieces, was his old rifle, a Springfield. It was a long, heavy, military gun. He was cleaning it, his movements economical, precise and cold. There was a look on his face she had never seen before, a stillness, a terrible, focused calm. She watched him for a long time. He did not seem to know she was awake. His hands moved with an ancient, practiced knowledge, oiling the breech, checking the sight, testing the action. When he was done, he assembled it. The click-clack of the metal parts sliding together was the loudest sound she had ever heard. He stood up, not looking at her, and put on his heavy coat. He took the rifle and left the cabin. She scrambled from the bed, ran to the window, and scraped at the frost. He was not chopping wood. He was not checking the animals. He was walking the perimeter. He moved with that same careful, limping gait, but it was no longer the gait of a wounded rancher. It was the tread of a hunter. He stopped at the edge of the trees, staring down the canyon. He was measuring distances. He was checking sight lines. He was reading the snow for trails that were not there. He went to the creek, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, and she watched him bend, examining the ice, the banks, the rocks. He was setting traps. She could not see what he was doing, but she knew this was not a man preparing to run. This was a man preparing a battlefield. He moved back toward the cabin, his face hard, his eyes distant. He was not with her. He was somewhere else, a long time ago. He was in the war. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the cabin, on the small, sturdy chimney, on the door. He was thinking about fire. He was back in Tennessee. The memory was not the boy. The memory was the fire, the one he had lied about, the one he had tried to bury. He was with Bowen. The homestead was in the trees, a plume of smoke from its chimney. "They're harboring him," Bowen had said, his eyes bright. "We burn him out." Elias, in the memory, had stood silent. He had hesitated. He had not said no. He had not raised his rifle. He had just watched. He had watched Bowen light the torch. He had watched him toss it onto the dry pine of the porch. The fire had been fast. He remembered the whoosh as the cabin caught. He remembered the smell of burning pitch and roasting meat and something else. Then the screaming. A woman, a child. They had burst from the door, their clothes a sheet of flame. And then he had shot Bowen. Too late. He had shot his partner, but he had let them burn. He had stood there, his rifle smoking, and listened to the screaming stop. He had never forgiven himself. Not for the boy he had shot, but for the woman and child he had not. He blinked, the cold air stinging his face. He was in the canyon. He was looking at his own cabin. He saw Delia's small, pale face in the window. He would not be too late this time. This was his penance. He would not let another homestead burn. Delia watched him. She watched this cold, efficient, dangerous man, and a terrible, profound realization settled over her. She loved him. It was not a soft, gentle feeling. It was a hard, aching, terrified love. She did not love the quiet rancher. She loved this man, the man who was as broken as she was, the man who had seen her own ugly truth and had not run, the man who knew how to kill. He came back inside, the cold rolling off him. He did not look at her. He went to the stove and poured a cup of coffee. His hands were steady. She went to him, her bare feet silent. She stood beside him. "I made coffee," she said, her voice small. He grunted, taking a sip. She took a breath. "You're not a good man, Elias." He froze. He set the cup down. He looked at her, his eyes cold, empty. He was waiting for the final blow. The judgment. "No," he said, his voice flat. "I'm not, but you're the first man," she said, her voice trembling. "Who didn't try to own me." He stared at her. It was not an accusation. It was something else. It was her own vow. He saw the truth in her eyes, a mirror of his own. He had never wanted to own her. He had wanted her to be free. And he was just now realizing he would kill any man who tried to stop it. He nodded. Once. A short, sharp acknowledgement. It was all that needed to be said. They waited. 2 days passed. The silence in the cabin was stretched thin. A raw nerve. Every gust of wind was the sound of horses. Every snap of the fire was a gunshot. On the third night, they heard it. It was not the wind. It was the jingle of bridles, the crunch of snow, the low, quiet murmur of men's voices. Elias was on his feet in an instant. He was not surprised. He was ready. He blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into near darkness, lit only by the low, red glow of the fire in the stove. "Delia," he said, his voice a low command. "Your room, now!" She was frozen, her eyes wide. "Now!" he said, his voice sharp. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting. "Bar the door. Do not make a sound. Do not come out, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" She looked at him, at this cold, dark stranger. "Elias, Do you understand me?" She nodded, tears welling. "Go!" She ran to the storeroom, her bare feet silent. He heard the door close. He heard the heavy thud of the wooden bar sliding into place. He picked up his rifle, checked the load, and walked onto the porch. He stood in the shadows, just outside the door. 4 riders. They were dark silhouettes against the moonlit snow. They stopped 100 feet from the cabin, just at the edge of the light. "Elias Carr!" a voice called. It was not Harlan, the marshal. This voice was different. Greasy, confident. Elias stepped out from the shadows, his rifle held loosely in his hand, pointing at the ground. "That's me. This is private land. State your business and ride on." One rider dismounted. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders, with a long coat. He walked forward, his spurs jingling, into the faint light from the cabin. He was wearing a tin star, pinned crookedly to his coat. His face was scarred on one side, a puckered, angry-looking thing that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. His eyes were small, black, and dead. Delia, from behind her door, had her ear pressed to the wood. She heard the voice, and her blood turned to ice. It was him, Silas. "Private land, is it?" Silas Croft laughed, a low, wet sound. I'm Deputy Silas Croft, from down Texas way. I'm here on official business." He stopped, his hand on the butt of his pistol. "I'm looking for a piece of stolen property. A whore named Delia. She's mine." "There's no one here by that name," Elias said, his voice flat. "Don't lie to me." "Rancher?" Silas sneered. "I had a chat with Harlan. He said you were a poor liar. I can smell her. She's in there, isn't she? Hiding under your bed?" "The only person in that cabin," Elias said, his voice dropping, "is my wife." Silas froze. He stared at Elias. Then he threw his head back and howled. It was a loud, barking, ugly laugh that shattered the canyon's silence. His men, sitting on their horses, chuckled. "His wife?" Silas bellowed, slapping his thigh. "You married her? You married my property? You married the $2 whore that I bought and paid for?" The laughter stopped as quickly as it began. Silas's face went cold, the sneer tightening. "You can't marry what's already owned. Carr, I've got papers." He tapped a pocket on his coat. "Bounty papers. Stolen property. Attempted murder. That's what she is. And she's mine. Get off my land," Elias said, his voice a low growl. He raised the rifle, just an inch, until it was pointing at Silas's belly. Silas's eyes flicked to the rifle, and he smiled. "You're a hard man. I'll respect that. For a minute." He held up his hands. "I'll give you a choice. 'Cause I'm a deputy, and I follow the law. You've got 3 days, 3 days to turn that girl over to me. You walk her out, tied, and I might let you keep your ranch. I might." He started backing toward his horse, his eyes never leaving Elias. "You don't," he said, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "I'm coming back, and I'm not coming back as a deputy. I'm coming back with my friends, and we're burning this place to the ground. We're going to find out, rancher, just what it takes to make you scream." He swung onto his horse. 3 days. Carr, think on it. Think on what she is. Think on what she did. And think on what I'm going to do to her when I get her back." He and his riders turned their horses, a slow, arrogant pivot, and rode out of the canyon. Elias stood on the porch, his rifle in his hand, his face a mask of stone, listening to the sound of the horses fade, until all that was left was the cold, heavy silence of the night. The heavy bar of the cabin door thudded into place, a sound of absolute finality. Elias turned, his back to the wood, and faced her. The silence in the room was a living thing, a cold, heavy presence that pressed against their ears. Delia stood by the table, her hands flat on the wood, her knuckles white. She was not crying. Her face was a pale, hard mask, her eyes dark, bottomless. "We pack, now," Elias said, his voice a low, urgent command. He was already moving, grabbing a saddlebag, his movements clipped, efficient. "We take both horses. We'll follow the high ridge north into the deep territory. We can lose them in the passes before the snow melts." Delia did not move. "No." He stopped, the saddlebag half full. "Delia, this is not a choice. That is not a man. It's a sickness. He has 3 riders. He will be back. He will burn this place." "And then he'll hunt us," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He'll hunt me. I'll lose him," Elias growled. "I was a scout. I can—" "No." She finally looked at him, and her gaze was so steady, so full of a cold, terrible clarity, that it stopped his words. "He's right about one thing. If I walk out that door, I'll be running forever. I'll be his, even if he never finds me." She took a shaky breath. "I've been looking over my shoulder my whole life. Elias, I'm tired. I'm just so tired of running. This is not a fight. Delia, this is slaughter. You want to die here? You want me to die here." "I don't want to die," she said, and her voice cracked, the first sign of the terror beneath the ice. "But I don't want to live like that. Not anymore. You said if you walk out that door, it won't be freedom. You were right. So I'm not walking." He stared at her, this small, impossible woman, the terror that had made her a ghost in the saloon, that had made her freeze in the barn. was still there. But it had finally been outweighed by something else. Something harder. Something he had put there. Hope. And it was a terrible, dangerous thing. "You won't win this for me, Elias," she said, walking toward him. "But maybe we can win it." He saw the plan in her eyes before she said it. "No," he said, a harsh denial. "Absolutely not. He wants me," she said, her voice low, intense. "He wants to see me crawl. He's arrogant. He's not thinking about you. Not really. He's thinking about me. What he'll do to me. Delia, stop! So I'll crawl," she whispered. "I'll go to him. I'll surrender." She spat the word. "I'll meet him at the creek, at the bend. It's the only way in. He'll be there. He'll be waiting." Elias looked at her. His mind, the scout's mind, already turning, the creek bend. It was a natural choke point, a killing field. "He'll be off his guard," he said. The words his, but the thought hers. "He'll be enjoying the show. He'll be focused on you. And you," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Will be on the ridge, the one that overlooks the bend, the one with the stand of pine." He nodded slowly, the brutal logic of it clicking into place. "It's a long shot, 100 yards, maybe more." "You were a scout," she said. It was not a question. "I was." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "He'll have 3 men. You said you shot a boy, in the back." Her words were not an accusation. They were a reminder. "Can you shoot this man in the chest?" He looked at her, at the hardness she had found. "Yes, I'll take the first. The one who looks like the real threat. The one who isn't laughing. The other 2, they'll scatter. They're just riders. They'll panic." "But Silas won't," she said. "No," Elias agreed, his voice grim. "He'll go for you. That's when you have to run, or fight. You have to give me time. Time to reload. Time to get a clean shot." "I stabbed him once," she said, her hands clenching into small, white fists. "I can fight him again." They stood in the center of the cabin, the plan hanging between them. It was a desperate, insane, fragile thing. A prayer built on gunpowder and a woman's courage. 2 days, Elias said, his voice all business now, all scout. "He gave us 3. We'll wait 2. Let him get comfortable. Let him get arrogant." The 2 days of waiting were a quiet, refined torture. They were 2 actors in a play where the final act was unwritten. They did not speak of the plan. They did not speak of Silas. Elias was gone from dawn until dusk. Delia, watching from the window, would see him, a dark speck high on the ridge, moving through the snow. He was not the limping rancher. He was a different man. He was measuring distances. He was building a sniper's nest, a small, hidden blind of pine boughs and snow. He was clearing a shooting lane, snapping small, frozen branches. He was becoming the man he had tried to bury. Delia stayed in the cabin. She found a frantic, terrible energy. She scrubbed the floorboards. She baked. She took the last of their flour, the last of their salt, and she made hardtack, dozens of them. She polished the tin cups. She mended every hole in Elias's clothes, her stitches small, tight, and perfect. She was a woman preparing a house for a funeral, though she did not know whose. They did not sleep. They sat at the table at night, the cabin silent, the rifle on the table between them. They would drink coffee, black and bitter, and listen. They listened to the wind. They listened for the sound of horses. They listened to the slow, heavy ticking of the clock, each tick a hammer blow, counting down the last of their time. The 3rd night arrived. The night before, the stew she had made sat cold on the stove. Neither of them could eat. The air in the cabin was so thick with fear and unspoken words. It was hard to breathe. "You don't have to do this," Elias said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. He was sitting at the table, his hand resting on the rifle. "We can still run, tonight, right now." Delia came and stood behind him. She put her hands on his shoulders. She could feel the tension in him, the coiled springs of a violence he was holding on a short, fraying leash. "And what would we be, Elias?" she asked, her voice soft. Two ghosts, running from a man who should already be dead? Running from a man who's been haunting me my whole life. She leaned down, her lips near his ear. He doesn't just haunt me, he haunts you, too. He did not answer. She walked around the table and sat, not in her chair, but on the floor at his feet. She laid her head on his knee. It was an act of such simple, profound trust that it made his throat ache. After a long moment, his hand, hesitant and rough, came to rest on her hair. "I'm scared," she whispered to his knees. "I'm so scared I can't breathe." "I know," he said, his voice a rasp. "Me too." They stayed like that for a long time. Finally, he stood, pulling her up with him. He did not speak. He just led her to the bed. This was not the desperate, frantic coupling of their first time. This was their last. It was a night of such profound, aching sorrow that it was almost holy. He undressed her slowly, as if she were made of spun glass, his rough fingers tracing the faint, silvery lines of old scars on her back, his lips following, a silent mourn of prayer. She unbuttoned his shirt, her cold, trembling fingers pressing against the warm, solid wall of his chest. She held his face in her hands, his rough, bearded cheeks, and she kissed the old, white scar at his temple, the one the world had given him. Their lovemaking was a slow, agonizing, gentle goodbye. It was a desperate attempt to memorize each other. It was the whisper of skin, the taste of salt, the quiet, muffled sobs they both tried to hide. It was a final, desperate, human act, a small, warm fire against the vast, howling cold of what was to come. After, they lay tangled, his arm a heavy, possessive bar over her waist, her face buried in his shoulder. They did not sleep. They lay, listening to the cabin settle, to the wind rising. "Promise me," she whispered, her voice muffled against his skin. "Anything," he breathed, his lips in her hair. If it goes wrong, if he gets me," she pulled back, forcing him to look at her in the dim, gray light. Her eyes were wide, her face a mask of terrible, urgent need. "Don't let him take me. Elias, don't let him drag me back. You said you'd fight for me. Fight him. Don't let him win." He stared at her, a cold, sick dread filling him. He understood. "Promise me," she insisted, her voice a blade. "Shoot me! Shoot me!" He recoiled, his body tensing, pulling away. "Delia, no, I won't." "You will," she said, her hands grabbing his shirt, her voice desperate. "It's the only thing I've ever asked of you. It's the only thing I'll ever ask. Don't let him win. Don't let him put his hands on me again. Please, Elias, please." He looked at her, at this impossible, brave, broken woman. He saw the horror in her eyes, the years of it. He could not say the words. He could not make the promise, so he just pulled her to him, his mouth crashing down on hers, a hard, painful, brutal kiss that was not about love, but about a vow. It was a promise of a different kind, a promise that he would, in the end, do what had to be done. They did not sleep. They held each other, two shipwrecked souls, waiting for the gray light of dawn. The morning was still, cold, and a flat, lifeless gray. The world was muffled in a new, light blanket of snow. Elias was already up. He was dressed in his winter clothes. The scout. He was not Elias, the rancher. He was the man she had seen on the ridge. He was checking his rifle, his pistol. His movements were calm, fluid, and economical. Delia rose from the bed, the cold air a slap. She went to the basin and splashed the ice-cold water on her face, the shock of it welcome. Clearing her head, she dressed, her fingers numb. The wool shirt, the trousers. Then she went to his mother's trunk. She pulled out a long, heavy, white wool shawl. It was clean and soft. She wrapped it around her shoulders. "It's white," Elias said from the door. His voice was hoarse. "He'll see me," she said, her own voice flat. It draped over her like a funeral veil, a shroud of surrender. They stood at the door. There were no more words to say. They had said them all in the dark. He reached out and touched her cheek, his thumb rough on her skin. "I'll be on the ridge, in the pines." "I know," she whispered. "Wait for the sun to hit the peak," he said, nodding to the west. "That's when they'll be watching. Then go." He did not kiss her. He just held her gaze for one long, agonizing second. Then he turned, slipped out the back door, and vanished into the gray woods. A ghost. Delia waited. She sat at the table, her hands flat on the wood. She watched the light. She watched the slow, heavy hands of the clock. 1 hour, then 2. Finally, a weak, watery beam of yellow sun broke through the clouds and touched the high, snow-covered peak to the west. It was time. She stood. She took a long, shuddering breath. She opened the cabin door. She did not look back. She stepped out into the snow and began the long, 1-mile walk to the creek. The world was silent. The only sound was the crunch of her boots in the snow. Every step was a hammer blow against the frozen earth. Every tree was a witness. She reached the edge of the woods and stopped. Below her, in the canyon, was the creek. A ribbon of black. Fast-moving water cut through a wider, frozen plain of ice. They were there, 4 riders. They were waiting, just as Elias had said, by the creek bend, their horses stamped, their breath pluming in the cold. One of them saw her. He pointed. Silas Cruft dismounted. He grinned. That same awful, greasy grin she saw in her nightmares. He was wearing his tin star. "Well, well," he called, his voice echoing in the still, cold air. "Look what the snow washed up. Did your man finally find his spine and throw you out?" Delia walked out of the trees, onto the open bank. She stopped 50 feet from them. She wrapped the shawl tighter around her. "I'm here." "You are," he said, his voice full of a low, gloating pleasure. He walked toward her, his hand on his hip, his spurs jingling. "Where's the rancher? He hiding under your skirt? Or did he take my advice and run?" "I'll come," Delia said, her voice shaking, but loud enough for him to hear. "I'll come. If you let him live, if you ride on." Silas threw his head back and laughed. It was the barking, ugly sound from the porch. "You'll come. Oh, you'll come, girl. You don't make the terms. I make the terms." He turned back to his horse and uncoiled a long, thick rope from his saddle. He walked back to her, his eyes glittering. He let the rope fall into the snow at her feet. "You know what this is for," he sneered. "Put your hands behind your back. Kneel." Delia looked at the rope. She looked at his face, at the puckered scar, at the dead, black eyes. She felt the old, cold terror rising, threatening to choke her. "I said, kneel," Silas snarled. She looked at the rope. Then she looked up, not at him, past him. She looked at the high ridge, at the dark, silent stand of pine. "No," she whispered. Silas's face darkened. "What did you say?" "No." He lunged for her, his face a mask of rage. The world exploded. A single, deafening crack echoed from the ridge. It was not a pistol. It was the Springfield. And it was a sound of judgment. The man on the horse closest to Silas, the one with his hand already on his rifle, was thrown backward. A red flower bloomed on his heavy coat. He hit the snow and did not move. Chaos. The horses screamed and reared. The other 2 riders yelled, fumbling for their guns, their eyes wide, spinning their horses in confusion, looking for the shooter. Crack! The second shot. Elias was fast. He had reloaded while they panicked. The second rider grabbed his shoulder. A raw scream tearing from his throat, and he kicked his horse, his only thought to flee, galloping madly back down the canyon. Silas did not panic. He was a predator. He roared, a sound of pure, animal rage, and he dove, not for cover, but for Delia. He grabbed her by the hair, dragging her down. "He missed! Your man missed the one that counts!" He fumbled for his pistol, putting his body between her and the ridge, using her as a shield. He dragged her, stumbling, screaming, toward the creek. Delia fought. She was not a victim. She was a trapped animal. As he raised his pistol, She sank her teeth into the thick, glazed flesh of his hand. He bellowed, a high-pitched sound of pain, and his hand jerked. The pistol fired, the shot deafening, the bullet whining harmlessly into the sky. He backhanded her, a brutal, open-handed blow that split her lip and sent her sprawling onto the ice. He lost his grip. He lunged for her again, just as the third rider, the last one, made his choice. He wheeled his horse, his face white with terror, and fled, galloping after his wounded companion. They were alone. "He's alone, girl," Silas snarled, his eyes wild. "It's just him." He grabbed her, pulling her up. He dragged her into the water. The thin ice at the edge shattered, and they fell, waist-deep, into the freezing, black, fast-moving current. The cold was a physical blow, a giant's fist that stole Delia's breath. Silas held her, his arm a steel band across her throat. His pistol was gone, lost in the fall. He pulled his knife. "Show yourself, rancher," he screamed, his voice hoarse, waving the knife at the ridge. "Show yourself, you coward, or I'll cut her throat right here. I'll cut her throat and leave her for the crows." Delia fought. She clawed at his face, her nails digging for his eyes. She kicked, her legs useless in the heavy current. And then she saw him. He was not on the ridge. He was crashing through the trees, down the embankment, his face a mask of white, cold rage. He was not holding the rifle. He had his pistol in his hand. He did not slow. He hit the edge of the creek, his bad leg buckling, and he fell. But he was up in an instant. He crashed through the broken ice, into the water, the numbing cold swallowing him to his chest. He was 10 feet away. Silas turned, his eyes wide with surprise, and he shoved Delia at Elias, using her as a battering ram, his knife raised, ready to strike. "Elias!" Delia screamed. A shot, muffled. Not from Elias. The third rider. He hadn't fled. He had circled. He was in the trees, on the other side of the creek. Elias grunted, a sharp, pained sound, and he stumbled in the water, his hand flying to his side, but he was still coming. He lunged forward, through the water, his pistol raised. Silas hesitated, his knife high, surprised by the man who would not fall. Elias did not hesitate. He did not aim. He was point blank. He shoved the barrel of the pistol into the center of Silas's chest and pulled the trigger. The boom was deafening, a final, terrible sound. Silas's eyes went wide, his mouth opened, a look of profound, stupid surprise. He looked down at his chest, at the smoking, ruined hole in his coat. He looked up at Elias. He fell backward, the black water swallowing him. The current, red for a moment, took him, and he was gone. Silence. The third rider was gone, vanished back into the woods. Silas was gone. It was just the sound of the creek, the wind in the pines, and the gasping, ragged sound of their breathing. Delia, her teeth chattering, her body numb, turned to Elias. He was standing, swaying, in the middle of the creek. He was staring at the water where Silas had vanished. "Elias," she said, her voice a croak. He looked at her. His face was gray. He tried to take a step toward her. He stumbled. He looked down at his side, as if surprised. His hand was clamped there, but it was not enough. A dark, spreading stain was turning the black water an even darker red. He collapsed, falling forward into the creek, his body held up only by the rushing current. The cold was a solid thing, a wall of ice. It had stolen her breath when she fell into the creek. But now, seeing Elias fall, a different fire roared to life in her blood, a frantic, desperate heat. "No," she said. The word was a gasp, a denial, a prayer. She lunged through the fast, black water. It was a liquid prison, waist deep, her legs numb, useless stumps, the current strong, trying to steal him, to pull him down into the blackness where Silas had vanished. She grabbed the front of his heavy, sodden coat. "No," she said again, her voice a raw growl that tore at her throat. You don't get to leave." He was a dead weight. His eyes were closed. His face, in the gray, flat light, was a waxy, terrible color. She hooked her arms under his, her back screaming in protest, and she dragged him. She pulled him, inch by agonizing inch, out of the current, over the sharp, broken ice, and onto the frozen, snow-covered bank. Blood. There was so much. It pumped, a slow, steady pulse from his left side, staining the white snow a sickening, dark crimson. "Elias," she panted, her breath tearing in her chest. She fell to her knees beside him and shook him, her hands clumsy, numb. "Elias, stay. You hear me? You stay." His eyelids fluttered. He looked at her, his eyes unfocused, clouded with a pain so deep it looked like confusion. "Delia," he rasped, and a small, bloody froth touched his lips. "Run north." "Shut up," she sobbed, a strange, harsh sound that was more rage than grief. "Shut up. You're not dying. I won't let you." The walk back to the cabin was a mile. It was an eternity. It was a journey through every circle of hell. She was not strong enough to carry him. She was not strong enough to lift him. But she did. She hauled him to his feet. He was a giant, a leaden, impossible weight. She got his arm over her small shoulders, his entire body sagging against her. He was half-conscious, his feet dragging, his good leg useless, his bad leg a horror. They moved. One step, then another. She fell. She fell a dozen times, her knees buckling, sending them both sprawling into the snow. The blood trail they left was a bright, terrible scar on the white landscape. Each time, she got up. She screamed with effort, with rage, with a furious denial of the cold, the pain, the impossible weight. She hauled him back to his feet. "You're not dying," she grunted, her words a rhythm, a prayer, a curse. "You don't get to leave. You promised. You promised." He faded in and out of consciousness. He would murmur, his voice a ghost. "Fire, the homestead, burning," and she would shake him, her small, frozen hands slapping his face, the sting lost in the numbness. "No, no fire, just me, just the cabin. It's warm. We're almost there. Elias, stay, stay with me." The last 100 yards were a blur. She was not walking. She was crawling, dragging him. Her body was a single, screaming nerve of cold and agony. But she did not stop. She fell through the cabin door, dragging him over the threshold, and collapsed onto the floorboards. A sodden, frozen, bloody heap. He was unconscious. His breathing was shallow, a faint, rattling sound. For a moment, she lay there, the world spinning, the blessed, still warmth of the cabin's dead air a shock. Then the terror jolted her. She scrambled to her feet. The fire, it was almost out, just a bed of dull, red embers in the stove. She worked with a frantic, clumsy haste, her hands blue and numb, useless clubs. She fumbled with the kindling. Dropping it, she cursed, a raw, ugly sound. "Light! Damn you! Light!" She grabbed the poker, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold it, and plunged it into the stove, into the heart of the embers, again and again, as if attacking an enemy. She burned her hand, a sharp, searing pain. She cried out, but she did not stop. She fed it wood. She fed it splinters. She fed it her own rage, until a small, hesitant flame finally licked up. She did not wait for it to be a fire. She ran to Elias. She ripped his clothes open, the sodden wool, the shirt, the union suit. She tore them with her teeth when her frozen fingers failed. The wound, it was a small, neat hole on his left side, just above his hip. It was dark, ugly, and it was still, slowly, weeping blood. "No," she whispered. She ran to her storeroom, to the trunk at the foot of her cot. She pulled out her mending kit, needle, thread. She found his whiskey, the bottle he'd bought that first day in Dry Creek. She poured it, not on the wound, but into a tin cup. She held his head, forced his jaw open, and poured a stream of it down his throat. He coughed, a violent, choking sound. His eyes flew open. He saw her. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Good," he rasped, and passed out again. She poured the rest of the whiskey over the needle, over her own hands, over the raw, puckered wound. She had stitched his coat. She had mended his trousers. Her stitches were small, tight, and perfect. She took the first stitch. His body arched off the floor, a silent, rigid scream of agony, even in unconsciousness. Delia cried. Tears, hot and fast, streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." She pushed the needle through again. She was not mending cloth. She was mending a life. She sewed. She stitched his flesh together, her hands, which had been numb, now a burning, shaking agony. The fire was roaring now. The cabin was becoming a stifling, close heat. She was sweating, her hair matted to her face. "Don't you leave me," she begged, the words a low, desperate litany. "Don't you dare leave me, Elias Carr. You can't. I'm not done. You're not done," she finished. It was an ugly, puckered, terrible seam, black thread against his pale, ashen skin. She bandaged it with strips of a clean sheet she tore with her teeth. She stripped the rest of his wet clothes off. She stripped her own. She piled every blanket, every quilt, every bearskin in the cabin on top of his bed. She dragged him onto it. Then she climbed in. She curled her small, shivering, naked body against his, pressing her skin to his, trying to force her own life, her own heat, into his cold, still form. She lay there, her arm across his chest, her head on his shoulder, and she cried. She cried for him. She cried for Silas. She cried for the girl in the saloon, and she prayed, not to a God she did not believe in, but to the stubborn, quiet, broken man beneath her. "Stay," she whispered into his skin. "Stay. Be my future." Days passed. He did not die. He did not wake. He fell into a fever, a deep, burning, restless state. He would thrash, his arms flailing, and he would speak. He spoke of fire. "The roof. It's coming down." He spoke of the war. "Bowen. No, don't shoot." He spoke of her. "Delia. The water. So cold." She did not leave him. She sat in the chair, the one he had sat in, watching her. She sat for days. She spooned water, and then thin broth, between his cracked, fevered lips. She changed the bandages, wincing at the red, angry look of the wound. But it was not swelling. It was not rotting. It was Holden. She kept the fire going. It was her god. It was a roaring, hungry beast. She fed it all the wood they had, until she was forced to put on his boots, his coat, and go out, her body aching with an exhaustion so deep it felt like death. And chop more. She swung the axe, her small, thin arms straining, until there was another pile. On the 4th day, or perhaps the 5th, the world had become a blur of fire and water and his low, constant moaning. She was asleep in the chair, her head lolled back, her mouth open, when his voice cut through her exhaustion. "You're a terrible nurse." Her eyes snapped open. He was looking at her. His eyes were clear. They were his own. The fever was gone. He was pale, his face gaunt, his beard matted. But he was looking at her. You're a terrible patient," she whispered, and a single, hot tear, a tear of pure, agonizing relief, slid down her face. He tried to smile. It was a grimace of pain. "Hurts. Good," she said, her voice breaking. "It should." He survived. They were snowed in for weeks. The world outside did not exist. There was no Silas. There was no Marshall. There was no dry creek. There was only the cabin. It was a strange, quiet, healing time. He was weak. He could not sit up. She was his hands, his feet. She fed him. She cleaned him. She read to him, stumbling over the words in the one book he owned, a worn copy of Shakespeare. She was not his whore. She was not his lover. She was his guardian. And in this, she found a new, quiet strength. He watched her. He watched her move about the cabin, her steps light, her face no longer pale with terror, but flushed with the heat of the stove, and with purpose. He watched her, and he fell in love, not with the girl he had saved, but with the woman who had saved him. The world began to thaw. It was a slow, agonizing process, a symphony of drips and cracks. The heavy snow on the roof began to slide, crashing to the ground in great, wet thuds. The creek, which had been a silent ribbon, began to roar. The world was waking up. With the thaw, the world returned. Elias was sitting up. He was in the chair by the fire, his bad leg propped up, his face still pale, but his eyes were his own. Delia was outside, on the porch, her face turned to the first, weak sun. They heard the horse before they saw it. They both froze. The old terror, buried by the snow, returned in a cold, sharp rush. Elias's hand went to the pistol on the table beside him. Delia stepped back into the shadows of the door. It was not Harlan. It was not a rider. It was a boy, no older than 12, on a sway-backed mule. He was a male rider. He stopped, his eyes wide at the sight of Elias's gun. "Mr. Carr?" the boy squeaked. "That's me. Got a letter for you," the boy said. He held it out. "From the lawyer in town, Mr. Hemlock. He said it was urgent." Elias took the letter. He tossed the boy a coin. "Get, and don't come back till you're sent for." The boy nodded, his eyes darting from Elias to Delia, who was a shadow in the doorway, and he kicked his mule, eager to be gone. They waited until he was out of the canyon. Delia came and stood by his chair. Elias's hands were shaking as he broke the wax seal. He read it, his face a mask. "Elias?" she whispered. He read it again. His shoulders, which had been tense, slowly, almost imperceptibly, slumping. "He's dead," Elias said, his voice flat. "Silas?" "No, not just Silas. The other one. The one who shot me." He handed her the letter. Her hands shook, but she took it. She read, her lips moving, sounding out the hard words. It was from a lawyer. It was an official notice. Silas Croft. He was wanted, not in Texas, in California. For murder, for robbery. The badge was a fake. The papers were fake. The man who had shot Elias had been found, dead from his own wounds, 2 miles down the canyon. He had been a known associate of Croft's. "The last rider," Delia whispered. "The one who got away. He must have talked. In town." "He must have," Elias agreed. "It says the case is closed," she read, her voice trembling. "It says, in light of Mr. Croft's known history, his death is considered a public service. It says, no one will be coming to look." She looked up at him, her eyes wide, shining with a light he had never seen before. It was over. It was really, finally, over. She did not cry. She just stood. She let the paper fall from her hand. She stood on the porch, and for the first time in her life, she was not running. She was not hiding. She was just standing. They did not speak of it again. The letter was burned. The past was buried. They settled into a new life, a quiet one, the life of the thaw. Elias grew stronger. His limp was worse, the bullet having torn the muscle. But he was alive. He was solid. He began to work. He mended the corral. He taught her how to sight the rifle, this time for hunting, not for men. She bloomed. It was the only word for it. The fear had leached from her face. Color returned to her cheeks. She laughed, a sound that was as surprising as the first spring robin. One afternoon, they were behind the cabin, turning the hard, frozen earth. It was back-breaking work. They were planting a garden. Elias was leaning on his shovel, his breath coming hard. Delia was on her knees, her hands black with the rich, dark soil. She was pressing small, hopeful seeds into the earth. He watched her. He watched the sun on the back of her head. The dark hair that was no longer lank and greasy, but clean and shining. He had not planned it. He had no words. He had no rings. "Stay," he said, his voice a rough croak. She stopped, her hands in the dirt. She did not look up. "I'm not going anywhere, Elias." "No," he said, and he knelt. Not in proposal, but just to be on her level, to be in the dirt with her. It was an agony for his hip, but he did it. He knelt, and he looked at her, his face serious, his eyes full of a truth he had not known he possessed. Stay, he said again, his voice softer. Be my future. She looked up. Her hands were black. Her face was streaked with sweat, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She hesitated. She looked at this broken, scarred, quiet man. She looked at the small, hard patch of earth. And she smiled. Not a big smile. A small, trembling, true one. Yes, she whispered. She didn't even know if he had heard her. He just leaned in, his rough, bearded face smelling of sweat and earth. And he kissed her. A simple, chaste, and solid kiss. A promise. The final scene was weeks later. It was summer. The canyon was alive, green, and loud with the sound of the creek. The garden. Their garden was a patch of defiant, hopeful green. Delia was standing on the porch, just as the sun was setting, painting the high canyon walls in shades of purple and orange. She was barefoot. Her dress, one of his old shirts she had recut, was simple. She was watching the land, her land. Elias came up behind her. He did not limp. He just moved. He had been her shadow for months. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands, scarred and calloused, covering her own on the porch rail. He buried his face in her hair. It smelled of soap and sun. They stood like that for a long time, watching the world fade from day to night. You saved me, he said, his voice a low rumble against her back. She smiled, a small, secret smile. She leaned her head back against his chest. No, she whispered. You didn't save me. Elias, you just saw me. He was quiet for a moment. He held her tighter. And you, he said, his voice thick. You let me be seen, too. He kissed her temple. The wind, their old companion, the wind that had brought the snow, now brought the warm, soft scent of pine and dust. It blew through the canyon, over the cabin, over the small, hopeful garden, and over two scarred souls, building a life, not from ashes and frost, but from the simple, hard, and honest earth. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd sure be obliged if you'd leave a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from. If this kind of tale suits you, please subscribe to From Wild West, and be sure to share your thoughts with us in English.